Hi, I'm Richard Wilkinson and I wrote the music for Killing Sherlock, Lucy Worsley on the Case of Conan Doyle. Now there's so much stuff, so much music across all 3 episodes that I can't cover all of it. So I'm going to dig down into a couple of details. It was a real range of stuff tonally, and there's a real range of stuff stylistically beyond the piano and the guitar. We've got some quite classical sounding moments, some more modern primetime drama type stuff, as well as some slightly wonkier areas, some synth bits. Me attempting to play a Turkish rebab, which is the precursor to the violin, and the violin's quite old anyway, so the rebab is an old instrument. Every episode starts with a drama sequence, and the very first thing you hear in those drama sequences is a pitch up, a sort of gnarly sound, which is played on the rebab. The sound of the score, as is often the case, was a delicate balance between a range of characteristics. Obviously, we wanted to nod to the Victorian stuff, but there's also quite a modern aesthetic to the documentary. There's Sherlock's got this quite calculated heroism deduction going on that we wanted to represent, and then Arthur, over the course of the series, has quite an emotional journey and an ideological shift. There's lots of tonal shifts there, so we wanted to find the right sweet spot musically for all of that. The directors for all 3 episodes and the producers were just so lovely to work with and really collaborative and creatively minded. So those conversations were always really sensible and productive and really helpful. And it was such a collaborative effort to find where the sound of this series was. And I think it's all the stronger for it. And I'd love to cover all of it, but I'm just going to look at 2 things mainly. The first one is Arthur's theme, and the second is Sherlock's theme. I'll start with Arthur's theme because it was the hardest one to crack, but once I'd figured it out, it was the simplest idea, and it gave me the backbone to the whole score, so it was a bit of a godsend. I had this idea about having Arthur's theme be like an arpeggiated piano part, and then on top of that we'd sit Sherlock's theme, which would be a violin part because he plays the violin and it suits the character nicely. And I thought that would be a way to have both themes interact with each other, sometimes in a complementary way and sometimes maybe rubbing against each other a little bit. And I came up with a few ideas for that. This did work to a degree, and I like the sound of it and I like the concept of it, but the main issue we had with it was that it was too meandering and too long, and this is a series which is very pacey and snappy and has lots of twists and turns and doesn't really have long stretches where a melody like that or something that intricate could sit and breathe. So we needed something that could make the same statement but in a more condensed way, could get in and out and avoid fighting with dialogue and fighting with other stuff going on. And after one of the calls with the directors for the 3 episodes, I went to Notion, which is where I write all of my notes and keep all of my information for projects. And I just noticed that I titled the document ACD for Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, it just so happens that ACD are musical notes. And musical notes that work quite nicely together in that sequence as a little melody. And you can repurpose them and use them as minor or major, or change the timing up. And not only are they notes, but ACD are also chords. So using those chords, ACD, and changing them up where sometimes they're major and sometimes they're minor, just gave us a lot of material to be able to use and repurpose and twist and present in different ways depending on what was going on narratively in the series. And the switching up of that harmony from major to minor and back again, it plays really well against the conflict that Arthur had about Sherlock's popularity getting in the way of Arthur's ambition to be a serious writer. So this 3-note, 3-chord idea became the DNA pretty much for the entire score, and it's heard in lots of different musical contexts. There's lively versions, there's forlorn, there's heroic, there's frustrated, just sprinkled throughout the whole score. Now, Sherlock's theme, instead of being the violin melody that fits against that arpeggiated rhythmic thing, Sherlock's theme became its own 3-note motif to mirror Arthur's, partly because it seemed like a nice idea to have them both share similar elements to the theme, so a 3-note motif for Arthur and the same for Sherlock, but also for the same reasons that we wanted to have moments where we could establish Sherlock's theme and give it some sort of tonality and give it some sort of feeling. But we had to do that in a short space of time before the dialogue started or before other things happened that might have obscured it. So a really short motif, again, was the way to go for Sherlock. There is a longer version of it, which you hear in a few cues. It's the one I played at the start. It's the one that you hear in the end credits as well. I'll play the whole thing at the end. But the little motif that we hear most often is just the first 3 notes of a minor scale. Now, it's not as fixed to a key as Arthur's. Arthur's is always ACD, ACD. But Sherlock's motif is in lots of different keys. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's here, or here. But it's just the first, the second, and the minor third. And that little motif is used in lots of different ways, and it's recontextualized and reharmonized depending on what's happening with the narrative. Sometimes it's quite lively, and then other times it might be a bit more melancholy and somber. Once I'd settled on this idea of the 3-note motif for each of the main players in the series, I tried a few rough demos of the title music, and I was aiming for an element of mystery and melancholy, but with a harmonic progression. So the chords that I used, I didn't want it to ever feel like you knew exactly what was going to happen next. So it's a little bit twisty and turny, because that echoes both Arthur and Sherlock have these racing minds that are constantly finding a new way forward, but for very different reasons. And I wanted to represent that in the chord progression, to not necessarily do something that was, something that was really played out and obvious. So it had to be musical, but it had to be a little bit more, I don't want to say unpredictable, but not quite so straightforward. But then I started to get the edits of episode 1 through, and it was edited so well in such a dynamic way that I felt the title theme as it was there was maybe a little bit too low energy, and I wanted to bring in some elements and up the speed a little bit to match the energy that was coming across in the visuals. So I lifted the tempo up a little bit, and then I tweaked the arrangement, added a few more elements, and just gave the whole thing a little bit more energy, a little bit more zip. And then finally, I sent over parts to 2 musicians who recorded at very short notice remotely and did an absolutely wonderful job. Sandro Friedrich recorded flutes, including bass flute, which is a great sound, and did some overblown stuff, which has a really interesting character to it, and that's in quite a few of the cues. And Joni Fuller played violin and viola across a whole load of cues, from the mournful, lyrical ones to the more sprightly, up-tempo cues. And both of the players also played on all of our opening cues for the drama scenes at the beginning of each episode. So here's how the final title theme for the series sounded, which is an extended version of Sherlock's theme. And then at the end of it, I will play the full mix as heard in the episode. Or maybe even the extended mix, which is, I think, 30 seconds longer than you hear in the episode. So here we go.